Hello and welcome to the Shute Festival. Thank you very much to everybody for tuning in. I know we've got a very big audience for this event with Laurence Anholt, and I'm very excited to talk to him about his books and his career. And I think there are people actually joining us from all over the world for this, or many parts of the world, which is as it should be, because we're living in weird and wonderful times, and we have to do literary events like this via Zoom and computers and what have you, and it all works wonderfully. It means we have a much bigger audience than if we were just doing this in Shute. So my name is Jason Webster, and I'm a local author in southwest England. I live just over the border from Shute in the county of Dorset, but I'm still allowed to be involved in Shute Festival, you'll be glad to hear. And what it means is I'm going to be talking to Laurence, who is actually one of my favorite kinds of people, because not only does he have great taste in pink shirts, but he is also a very hardworking and very productive polymath, which is probably one of my favorite kinds of people. Let me explain. Laurence is the author of no less than 200 books. Yes, you heard that right. 200 books, maybe even more than 200. I mean, after 200, you just lose count, okay? Because it's just sort of, you know, who can keep count after 200? And he's written children's books. He's written young adult fiction, and now he's writing amazingly brilliant crime novels, which we're going to be talking about this evening with him. But not only that, not only has he written 200 books, he is also a highly accomplished painter and artist who trained at Falmouth and the Royal Academy. And he's just a sort of a multi-talented guy. And we're really, really pleased to have him tonight at the Shute Festival. So welcome, Laurence.
Oh, thank you so much, Jason. What an introduction.
Wasn't
it one of the Marx brothers who said, you make me sound so interesting, I can hardly wait to hear myself speak.
Well, we're hearing a lot about you and from you over the next hour. So great. So look, we're here principally to talk about your crime novels, the two of which have already come out. We've got The Art of Death. I've got them right here. We have The Art of Death, which is #1 in your crime series, and Festival of Death, which is #2. And we're going to be talking about those, but just as a sort of an intro, as a way in to those novels, let's maybe just briefly stroll through your career, because it is an incredible career. There are very few people.
Thank you so much, Jason.
You know,
actually, I'd just like to take the opportunity to say hello to so many lovely friends who've tuned in. It's a very strange experience, isn't it, Jason? Because they can see us, but we can't see them. But yeah. It's like a digital séance, I think. But we can feel the vibes and the warmth.
So I know you've got some images there of previous books. So what I thought we could do is maybe just take a look at those. We can put those on screen now and maybe just sort of talk us through this. So you started, in fact, you said a really interesting thing when we were chatting the other day about how your books have kind of followed the age of your children as they've sort of gone from babies to growing up and becoming adults. So perhaps you can kind of talk us through that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, obviously it wasn't a conscious thing, but my wife Kathy and I started making children's books about 35 years ago when our own kids were born. We'd both been through art school, Kathy at the Royal College and me at the Royal Academy. And then when our babies were born, we were looking for a way of making a living from our creativity. And I wanted to be at home. I wanted to be around my kids, as my father had not been. Yeah. And so we started producing these books, and the first series that I self-illustrated was this series for very young kids, which are an introduction to great artists, right? Seen through the eyes of a real child who knew the artist. I mean, I'm going to talk about this very briefly because, as you say, we want to get on to the business of murder. These have been a sort of mainstay for me, really. They've been knocking around for about 30 odd years, and they've sold, millions of copies in dozens of languages around the world. And so I've kept these going. I did one, this was the first one, Camille and the Sunflowers, obviously a story about Van Gogh. It's a book. I mean, each of these is a story about an artist, but there's another theme in each of the books. So this is very much a story about kindness and about prejudice, about somebody who's different.
Okay, great.
Here are some of the foreign language editions, and this is what has made the whole thing viable for us, really.
Sure.
This series does particularly well in Asia, Japanese, Chinese, and so on.
Fantastic.
I just thought I'd throw this up for fun. This is a Korean stage musical version of Camille and the Sunflowers, which Kathy and I went over to see in Seoul. Fantastic experience, such lovely people. The little boy who plays Camille is a little girl, and she was absolutely wonderful, and it was so much fun, and I didn't understand a word, but
it almost looks like an English pantomime, doesn't it, the way they've staged it?
These are some of my illustrations from my book about Cézanne. You can see the little boy Paul walking along the road. He's tiny there, and he's going to visit his father, also called Paul Cézanne. And they go on a journey together up in the mountains. And that's a story about fathers and sons, which is a very poignant theme for me, because I had a difficult relationship with my dad, and I have a lovely relationship with my son, I'm very pleased to say.
And I'm assuming, you know, these are all artists. You chose these artists because they're people who influenced your artwork.
Yeah, actually, Jason, it's not so much me who chooses it. It's you have to follow the national curriculum, and it's a question of what the foreign publishers want. I mean, I'd love to do some really, really obscure artists. I'd love to do far more women artists. I'd love to do far more non-Caucasian artists. But it's well, I could talk about that all night. It's a battle. But you know, it's something that we're pushing through. These books are all about to come out in a lovely, shiny new edition, I'm delighted to say. Yeah, and this is the most recent one a few years ago. Frida Kahlo, great and fascinating feminist icon, as you know.
Absolutely.
And then what I'm showing you here is just a sort of miscellaneous bunch of some of the books that I've done with various people, including my lovely wife Kathy, who I think is watching in tonight, and the chimpanzee one there, Babies, 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 Toot. All of those are her illustrations from many years ago. And Kathy is now has gone back to her painting. And if you check out catherineanholt.com and look at some of her work, it's absolutely wonderful. She's painting every day. And
forgive me, chimpanzee. That was because I think I forgot to mention this. Another sort of feather in your cap is that you actually owned a bookshop at one stage in Lime. Yeah, which was
we owned a bookshop called Chimpanzee Bookshop by the Sea in Lyme Regis. For a few years. It was an interesting dip into retail, and
you know the book world from all sides effectively.
It was really fascinating to actually, you know, we weren't behind the counter, but to see which books sold and which books didn't sell, and it did give you an interesting perspective. That's absolutely right. Yeah. These ones here are called the Seriously Silly Stories. And this is going up the age range. And as you said, Jason, I think my kids were growing up as I got into these. My kids probably would have been 7 or 8. And these are spoof fairy tales, which were really designed to attract reluctant readers, particularly boys, I have to say. And there must have been, I don't know, 50 of these altogether, illustrated by a wonderful guy called Arthur Robbins. And they did really well for many years. Not a bit quiet now since David Walliams came onto the scene, but they did really well for many years. And just my little blagging spot in the little inset there, that's winning an award with J.K. Rowling, Julia Donaldson, and Connie Huck. Good fun day. What happened to that? What happened to that?
Yes.
So I was just going to quickly mention this, Jason. This is our home. This is where we live. I'm actually speaking to you from home of Sam and Bijan, who are the festival organisers. I've discovered that my broadband, living in a rural area, is absolutely appalling. So I did a quick whiz over to Sam's house, and I'm speaking from their lovely house in Shute, and Sam's here in a socially distanced way. But I thought I'd put these up because one of the things that I've loved doing, I mean, you say I'm a polymath. I mean, that's very kind of you. I would say I'm a jack of all trades, really. And one of the things that I've always loved doing, and I know you do too, Jason, is making stuff with my hands.
Sure.
And over the years, Kathy and I, because we work from home, have had this amazing opportunity of buying old wrecks and renovating them from scratch. And we've done it probably 5 or 6 times.
Okay.
And this is our current place in Collerton, which I hope is where we'll stay. We bought it in appalling condition and completely took it apart and put it back together again. It is a gorgeous place on top of a hill, looking across the sea. Yeah, it's really special. And we have a wilding project there. We have 5 acres of wildflower meadows, and the wildlife is magical. It's such a great place to work. There's a little peep inside. I mean, it was a lot of work, and a lot of it we did ourselves. It's something that we've always done. Every weekend, you find me in my boiler suit.
So you're an artisan as well. So you really are, artist, artisan, writer, bookshop owner. I mean, yes, that's a fairly full spread you've got there.
Yeah, but I'm quite
old. Renovator, Fantastic.
I'm quite old, Jason, and I think I'm in my 60s now, and I think you just find by the time you reach your 60s, you look back and you have done a lot of things, haven't you?
Sure.
I think the thing for me, I can honestly say, is I've enjoyed everything that I've done. I've been really privileged in that way. My old dad did jobs he hated all his life, and he could have been a really good artist. And that didn't happen. And so he wasn't especially happy with the work that he did. And so I always thought as a kid, you know what, why isn't it possible to do something that you love and make a living out of it, and to do something that's got integrity too? And that's something that we try to pass on to our kids, who are all international drug dealers. They're wonderful artists.
Interpol will be knocking down on the door within 5 minutes, I should think. Yeah. So okay, well let's this is the last book you wrote before the crime novels, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is my first full-length novel. It's a young adult novel called The Hypnotist, and it's set in the deep south of America in 1963, very specifically. And it's a story, obviously, about race and the Ku Klux Klan. And it was a really fascinating journey for me. And I'm really proud of this book. It's a really unusual one, published by Penguin. And it took me into a completely new area, really. Well, I won't tell you the story. You can read it if you're interested.
Sure,
but yeah, that was a good one, and I'm really gratified that it won the Historical Association Book of the Year. It was endorsed by Amnesty International. It won a lot of awards. So I'm proud of that one. Probably more than anything I've done, hard as it was.
Fantastic. So it brings us now to your crime series, which is the mindful detective, and so and we'll delve into this, and we'll delve into the 2 main characters and what have you. But maybe you can just sort of talk us through how it happens, and what's the inception. Where does this begin? You've written these children's books, you've illustrated them, a lot of them. You've done a young adult novel. How did you suddenly go one day, right, I'm going to start writing some crime novels?
Yeah, it wasn't really sudden, Jason. You know how these things work. It'd been brewing for a long time, and living in this wonderful part of the world. I wonder if I've got. Yeah, I have. I put a few little images for those because I know we've got friends calling in from all around the world. This is where we are all privileged to live. It's the Jurassic Coast. In Devon and Dorset, really inspirational place. We're talking fossils. We're talking the French Lieutenant's Woman. There's a film coming out in a few weeks called Ammonite. Mary Anning. I've also done a children's book about her.
Yeah.
And so the inspiration came out of the landscape. These things, I suppose, are a combination of all sorts of different ideas that somehow organically grow together. So I'm interested in Buddhism. I love the intrigue of crime, but I can't cope with gruesome murders. I just don't watch that stuff and don't read it. And so I thought, well, supposing you had a Buddhist cop who feels too much for his own good. Whoops, I jumped ahead. And so that was the idea. And he has this. So he's called Vincent Kane.
Yeah.
He's a Buddhist cop who lives in a cabin on the Undercliff outside Lyme Regis. And the reason he lives in a cabin there is because the Undercliff is constantly fragmenting and falling apart. And Vincent Kane, being a Buddhist, is very interested in the idea of impermanence. So he lives in this cabin, which is sort of gently sinking down the hill into the sea.
It's a metaphor for his vision of life and how he approaches life.
Yeah, he's intuitive and he's an empath, and so he's a very reluctant cop. He finds the whole thing very difficult. And his partner is Shanti Joyce, who's moved from Camden Town down to the West Country, and they're a very unlikely duo because she's, tough, witty, seemingly so. Underneath it, she's a single mum and is a little bit of a facade. And there's a frisson, I'd say, Jason.
Yes,
very
definitely, yes, yeah, between the two of them, yes, and
so it's a bit of fun. And what I would like to do is just to acknowledge a few people, because a book is a team effort. It's not something that you do all by yourself. So obviously, I'd like to acknowledge my publishers, Constable Little Brown, who you've worked for too.
Yes, Constable published one of my books, Violencia, A New History of Spain. Yes, which came out a couple of years ago. That's right.
And as is traditional, my wonderful agent, Madeline Milburn. But two people I want to mention who are both local people, actually, who are really instrumental in this series are my friend Paul Blow, who's the artist who does these fantastic covers.
Yeah, they're beautiful, beautiful covers.
Yeah, they're wonderful. Paul Paul lives in Bridport, right near you. And check him out, everyone who's watching, and maybe he's listening in. He goes under the name Paulie Blow, Pauly Blow, Blow. He's got gazillions of followers on Instagram and so on, and he is, a bit of a genius and a lovely, lovely guy, and I'm really honoured to work with him. And I sort of fought with the publishers to get Paul on board because I really felt that he sort of captured the spirit of the series. Yeah.
And I'm glad.
Very briefly, the other person I'd like to mention is another good friend who lives locally, my pal Paddy Mcgrain, who worked with me very closely at the beginning of the series on sort of forming the ideas and helping to shape it, and we bounced ideas off each other a lot. So
and Paddy, a very accomplished crime novelist as well. So
a brilliant writer in his own right. Yeah. So it's sort of a team effort, and I've been working on these for 3-4 years now. And Festival of Death is the latest one, which is just out. Oh well, hang on, maybe you want to.
Well, I know there's a third in the moment, but maybe we'll come on to that a bit later on. But let's just come back to this question of crime. Why crime?
Shall I come out of this? Yeah, make you a bit bigger, Jason, so that people can admire our beards.
Yes, we'll have a beard off.
Yes, this is the bit.
So let's just come back to the question of crime. So what? Why did you decide to move into crime? Does crime pay? Is that the appeal for you?
I mean, again, it's not any one particular thing. I mean, what I knew I wanted to do was to write a full-length novel. I wanted to be able to do all the stuff that you can't do in children's books, sex and drug and rock and roll.
Sure.
I wanted to, have the freedom to play with all sorts of ideas, create a whole host of characters. And crime is great because crime gives you a sort of a structure. It's like a coat hanger, and you can hang more or less anything on it. Someone has died in an extraordinary way. Who did it and why? And once you've got that worked out, then you can have all sorts of fun creating characters. And I love playing around in these different environments. So the first one is set in the world of contemporary fine art, which is obviously my background. That's something I know something about. So that was a lot of fun. All the sort of precocious artists and the world of contemporary fine art.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, because it's as you say, it's set in this sort of rarefied world of fine art, and it is a world that you know and understand, and you sort of been trained there. I couldn't help but think all the time as I was reading this, and let's just sort of fill people in. It sort of involves the murder of a very high status female artist called Crystal Hafruin. Is that right?
Yeah.
And all in the back of your mind as you're reading the novel, you're starting to think, okay, is this based on some sort of well-known and controversial female artists that that are sort of household names, and also there seems to be a lot of your feelings and your thoughts about art sort of buried in that novel. I mean, particularly the opening sequence where the body, Christelle, I'm not giving anything away, where Christelle's body is found, that whole, and at the sort of opening event of her new exhibition, I felt that you had a lot of fun.
It's a retrospective of her life's work, and she's a sort of very narcissistic conceptual artist. No, not based on anyone in particular, but obviously there are elements of various artists in there. And she's found in a tank of formaldehyde in her own opening night, and people assume that it's a work of art, and it takes them quite a long time to realise that she is actually in there. And so, I mean, that sounds gruesome, but I hope you'll agree that I do it in a sort of light-handed way. I don't. I mean, I do feel that there is enough brutality in the world. I mean, if I can just be a little bit pretentious here, I do think that it's a privilege to be published, and I think we have an obligation as creatives, whether you're an artist or a writer or whatever you do, that what you put out in the world has to actually sort of add something to humanity. I mean, that sounds pretentious, but I do believe that. Sure. And I think there's enough brutality in the world. And so I don't want to add to that. So although these books are called, Festival of Death, Art of Death, and right now Solstice of Death, actually the publisher's name, not mine. I wanted just to call it the Mindful Detective, but death sells, apparently. And but I didn't want them to be brutal and horrible and gruesome. So they're left field. They're sort of quite funny.
Sure.
They're about characters really, and it's about intrigue, working out who did it, and this lovely thing of setting up false clues and red herrings. It's all good fun. But as you know, Jason, better than anyone. Oh, God, I mean, writing a full-length novel, and especially one that is easy to read, is fun, is light to read, I think people don't realise, and I don't think I realised until I sat down and did it myself, what at the bloodshed that goes on behind the scenes. I mean, just how difficult the damn job is. Writing a novel is like, I mean, I've been talking about renovating houses. Writing a novel is the equivalent of designing and building a house with your own fingertips and then painting it. I mean, it's a colossal task, isn't it?
Yeah, but you succeed magnificently and you make it look easy, which is great. And so
that's really nice of you to say so. All I can say is that when I started, I had a full head of hair like you, and it's damned hard. And the one funny enough, the first one was hard. Festival of Death was relatively easy, good fun. Glastonbury Festival, and I really, really enjoyed that. The one I'm writing now, Solstice of Death, which we'll come on to in a minute, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's really hard. I think it's really interesting, yeah.
Well, let's talk about these two main characters. We've got, Vince and Shanti.
Vincent Kane, also known as Veggie Cop. Yeah, by his.
Yeah, I mean, he is extraordinary. I mean, he's a Rumi quoting Buddhist, and he's probably the last person you would expect to be a policeman or a police detective. And I'm assuming that tension was part of what drew you to him. And I mean, I feel that and maybe I'm wrong here, but I feel that he came first.
I think so. I think I suppose, oh God, I don't want to, play amateur psychologist here, but I suppose in a way he's my kind of alter ego. He's me. The fun of it is that, I can write this character who's much younger than me. He's in his 30s. He bounds around the place, and he's terrifically good looking and has long dark hair, and he doesn't realize that, because he's terribly modest. And he sort of muddles through life in a kind of very kind and Buddhist way, very empathetic. I really like the guy. I really like him, and he can do no wrong. He can do no harm, and every crime he has to solve causes him so much distress because he feels the pain, as a true empath does, of all of the people involved and the families and so on. You've got to sort of fall in love with your characters to a certain extent, and so he is a combination of all me at that age to a certain extent, and lots of I'm very interested in Buddhism. I've been interested in Buddhism for a long time, and so
maybe talk us through that. So because that is a huge part. I mean, obviously the name of the whole series, The Mindful Detective, comes from him and his interest in Buddhism. And it's something that you're interested in. So maybe perhaps just sort of fill us in a bit about that, if you can.
I think probably the best way to answer that is if we sit in silence for 10 minutes. I bang a gong. I mean, Buddhism, it's extraordinary, the resurgence of interest in Buddhism right now. Buddhism, I think, is a fantastic belief system, 2,500 years old. And yet so many of the ideas and the principles seem so fresh right now. And the way that people now are embracing, mindfulness and meditation. What's the thing that my daughter Maddie's listening right now? And she's always talking about, what is it? Manifesting. Manifesting is the thing that a lot of young people are interested in, which is basically where, you think very hard about a Porsche, and there it is. I mean, that's a crude way of looking at it. But, in actual fact, that sounds horrible. Buddhism that comes from Buddhism. The Buddha said, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. And for me, that is the truest thing that's ever been said. What goes on in your head becomes your reality. I absolutely love that idea. And so if you think kind and positive thoughts, then good things happen in your life. If you are discontent and grumpy and hateful, then that becomes your reality. And so I'm really interested in that dynamic.
And that sets up this wonderful tension with Vincent, because he's thrust into this world that is it's the polar opposite of that of him. He's a murder detective, and I think that sort of that tension is wonderfully manifested, if I can use that word, in Shanti Joyce. His partner in crime detecting. So tell us about Shanti, because she's fascinating and very different.
Well, Shanti is sort of the opposite of. I wanted to break stereotypes with Shanti. So she's a single mom. She's very much a feminist, but her full name is Shantala, and she obviously has Indian heritage. And I like the fact that far from being mystical, Kane's the mystical one. Yeah. She's this kind of very down-to-earth woman who comes from Camden Town, and she ends up in the West Country, and she has this kind of defense barrier around herself, this cynicism, this sort of dry wit. And, I suppose, again, to play the amateur psychologist, I suppose these two characters, in a way, are kind of different aspects of myself, because I can be a bit like that. I can be a bit cynical. We all can, perhaps a bit cynical, and so, that dry humour. I like that very much. It's maybe a sort of British thing. I don't know. Well, and so payoff between them, I think, is interesting, and they're in love with each other. I mean, Kane openly is head over heels in love with Shanti, and Shanti is constantly pushing him away. She just got out of a terrible marriage. The last thing she wants is a relationship, but Kane is magnetically attractive, and even though he's incredibly annoying to her, and so there's that.
And this sets up, it's incredible humor. I mean, they're very funny books, and it's obviously we're dealing with murder, and murder's not a funny subject, but
Right.
there's this strain of humor that runs through,
Which I think comes from,
that runs through the novels, and largely comes from their relationship, I feel.
yeah. I mean, in actual fact, humor is part of Buddhism. It's a really important part of Buddhism. I mean, if you go on a Buddhist retreat, you will laugh until you stop.
Right.
I love humor. I like jokes. I mean, a joke is a little mini story, isn't it? And I've always liked that. And the series I showed you before, those seriously silly stories, are that's what they are. They're long jokes for kids, and so and they're quite surreal and so on. So there is a link between these two things,
Sure.
between those books and these books. All of these things tie up in a way, don't they?
And when you came to do these novels, decided to write crime novels, did you do a lot of research? I mean, obviously you're bringing a lot with you from your interest in Buddhism, the humor, and everything we've been talking about.
You're trying to find out if I killed somebody.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, because you're writing, I mean, within the crime genre, strictly speaking, these are police procedurals. So, did you do research into that?
Incredible amount of research. I mean, the things that you have to find out about, for example. I mean, it was actually my friend Paddy who found out in Festival of Death. Maybe we can look at that in a second, Sam, if that's possible. Festival of Death, the one that's set at Glastonbury Festival. It's about two brothers who are in a band called Stigma, and one of them is electrocuted by his own guitar live on the Pyramid stage in front of 150,000 witnesses. So I had to get into this whole technical thing with Paddy's help about how on earth you could die from an electric guitar, and I didn't know this, but an electric guitar doesn't carry a current. So it was incredibly complex. That's just one little example. There's so much. Let's see this. There's so much research involved, and especially the police procedural, which is something I knew nothing about at all.
So did you meet policemen? Were you talking to police officers about this? I mean, how did you go about that research side?
Yeah, I do have a friend in Lyme Regis who is a retired cop and lovely guy, very unconventional policeman. Okay. And I talked to him at length, and I do just an awful lot of research. Yeah, it's amazing what you can. It's amazing what you. The extraordinary thing is actually in this sort of career that I've been showing you. When I did that first book, Camille and the Sunflowers, you didn't have the internet, and to find out who this boy was, Camille Rouland, was an incredible task. I mean, I remember writing letters to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, waiting for a week for a response, and then having to get on trains and going to all of these places. Well, now, as you know, the touch of the mouse, you can download police procedural files and try and work out whether it's all correct. I don't guarantee it, but I do my absolute best. And to be honest, I'm more interested in the characters and the psychology and the game of it all than I am in. If you're looking for hard and fast, police procedural, you're going to be confused.
Yeah, but it's there. It's the backdrop to the whole thing, and it works within the rules of police procedurals.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah.
So we're seeing some images here of the Glastonbury Festival, which is where the second novel is set, Festival of Death. So obviously with the first book, you're talking about the art world, which is something you know a lot about. Why, what was the inspiration for moving into this?
I also know quite a lot about the Glastonbury Festival.
Right, okay.
It's something I went to every year for about 10 years. And when my kids were young, I took them as well. Kathy would never go. She doesn't like tents. You may find this extraordinarily hard to believe, but I had long hair I loved going to festivals, not only Glastonbury, but WOMAD and End of the Road Festival and so on and so forth. A good British festival or a good European, any festival, it marks that wonderful point of midsummer, and when it's not pouring with rain, it's just a joy. The Glastonbury Festival grew out of a traditional English fair, and it's just this wonderful, eccentric meeting of happy folk. It's so much fun, so lovely, and I haven't been for years, but I really, really enjoyed it. And so obviously with this series, the Mindful Detective series, each of them is set in an iconic West Country location.
Yeah.
So the first one was set in a famous Somerset gallery. This one is set at Glastonbury Festival, and the one I'm working on now at Stonehenge. And then I've got plans for, well, you name it, the Eden Project, and quite, maybe I won't list them all because someone might might get to it before me. But I've got a good long list of iconic West Country locations, and I'm the really exciting possibility right now is that my brilliant agent has sold TV rights, or yeah. Put it this way, we've got a TV option with a fantastic company who do Line of Duty and a lot of really big hit productions. And I mean, these things can fizzle out, but they're really keen. They've renewed the option twice, and they've got some interest from BritBox and various people. So it may happen. I honestly don't know. It would be absolutely wonderful if it did, because I think they would look great on screen. I mean, yeah, my intention here with these books is really very simple. I wanted to create a diversion, an entertainment. It's as simple as that. That's all I wanted to do. If someone enjoys reading the books, then I've done my job. It's as simple as that.
But I'm thinking, because you're an artist and you think visually, and they're very visual. They're very powerful images, very powerful visual images in the novels. That's going to make it much easier for them to be televised.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting thing. I mean, I think I'm maybe a little bit strange like that. I do think completely visually, because I trained as an artist. That's why there's quite a lot of description actually in my books, because for me, I'm getting myself into a sort of trance-like state. And it's not until I can touch it and smell it and see it that the thing starts to come to life for me. And so it's almost like sort of vivid dreaming, lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
You're almost there when it's working well, and then that painful thing where you cannot get into that space. But when it works well, it's that magical thing of almost like you are running a film in your head. And so yeah, that's really important for me. Yeah. Mm.
And no, I noticed that particularly, well, I think with both of them, but particularly with Festival of Death. I've never been to the Glastonbury Festival, and yet I now feel that I kind of know what it's like, but thanks to your novel, because I feel, you transport.
Right, if you can remember it, man, you weren't there.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
These are some of the foreign editions that are beginning to come through. The German series is doing really well. It's very funny, that cover there with all the Union Jack and the phone boxes, and there's even a double-decker red bus, which we don't see too many of in Lyme Regis. But and then there's a Danish edition, and
fantastic.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about, because they've obviously got the double-decker bus a bit wrong there. But, you're talking about the Southwest. It's the old cliche, isn't it, about crime novels set in a particular place, that, the city or the area where they set is one of the main characters in itself. I mean, are you finding that? I mean, or what is your experience of writing about the Southwest? How important is that to you?
What? Sorry, say that again. So about what, writing in the area that I'm living?
Yeah, writing about the Southwest. How important is that for you as an inspiration?
I'll tell you why I decided to do that, Jason. The previous book, which I showed you, The Hypnotist, was set in the deep south of America, and I set my in 1963, you know, and that is such a hard thing to do, to try and make that convincing, to try and make that real. So after I finished that book, I decided, right, the next book I do is damn well going to be right here, you know, because as you know, and as any of us know who live in this area, and I know there are many locals watching in. This is the finest place on the planet, isn't it? It's amazing around here. It really is a magical place, and the undercliff between Lyme Regis and where I live in Collerton and Seaton there, and all along the coast where you are towards Bridport, that whole Jurassic coast is the closest thing I think we've got to the rainforest in the UK, because it's got this shifting, it's blue lias rock which moves the whole time. So trees grow in this very twisted, strange way, and the wildlife there is extraordinary. And I spend a lot of time walking up there, and just those glimpses of the sea all of the time. It's so evocative and lovely. And then, you know, within a short distance, you can be in places like Stonehenge. What I've got here is, I said Paul Blow is the wonderful artist who's working on these books, and this is the first time I've shown this to anyone. This is Paul. I hope Paul's not going to be cross, but this is Paul's first rough for the cover of Solstice of Death, which is the one that I haven't even finished writing. I'm working on now, which is set at the midwinter solstice at Stonehenge, and a body is discovered on top of one of the lintels. Jason, you might be surprised to know.
Well, I mean, one of the things that strikes me about both the first two novels, you know, is that the deaths are spectacular. You know, they're not gruesome, but they are spectacular and very vivid. You know, the visuals around it are very vivid. You know, so I'm assuming it's not just a simple corpse on top of one of the lintels. There's going to be more to it. I don't know, but you know, maybe you can fill us in.
Well, there are a few druids. You can see a couple of them there. There's certainly some druids. And then there's I'll give you a little insight. Character I've been writing this morning, who's really good fun. He's called Professor Ned Tull, and he's an archaeologist, but he lives as the Neolithic people did. So he lives in one of those, you know, at Stonehenge by the visitor centre, there are those Neolithic roundhouses. There's a little village there, and he lives in one of those roundhouses exactly as the Neolithic people did, in order to absorb their lifestyle. And he's lived there for decades, and he's this kind of quite hairy, smelly man, and Cain ends up staying in one of the roundhouses with him, and he's a sort of a mentor of Cain's, because back in the day he had a television series called Neolithic Neighbours, which was one of Cain's favourite TV shows when he was growing up. So
was that a real programme? Did I see that when I was?
I don't think so. It should have been. Anyway, so yeah, I'm in Stonehenge in my head, and have you been, you know, reading about Stonehenge? You know, what an extraordinary place, and the whole history of it is incredible. And this is set at the midwinter solstice, which I've been so fascinated to read about. And of course, Stonehenge is a kind of a Neolithic computer, you know, which is tuned into the cosmos. And the midwinter solstice is one of the key points in the year. And the thing that I've just learned recently is that the Neolithic people probably believe that it was that first shaft of sunlight on the shortest day, that was the sun god impregnating Mother Earth. And then 9 months on, we have the harvest. So there's this whole kind of sexy thing going on.
Okay. And are you delving into the Welsh origins of the Bluestones?
Yeah, very much so. They're discovering that all the time. They're discovering new information, that the stones were brought, some of them, from the Preseli Hills in Wales. And they've just discovered, I think, in recent weeks, that they literally moved an entire stone circle from Wales to the Salisbury Plains using UFOs, of course.
Yeah. Well, my understanding is there is now a movement in Wales for asking for Stonehenge to be taken back.
Quite right.
Just like the Elgin marbles. So, you know, Who knows? Maybe that will be a twist in the novel. Maybe it's
as I said, this is an incredibly difficult book to write. This one because I'm sort of joking away here, but there are also some really big themes here. About time, and also I've been writing it during this pandemic, which has affected us all in such strange ways. And so there's a little bit of that. And the thing about the solstice, the midwinter solstice, is it's this kind of hiatus. It's a time when it's a moment when time sort of stops, where it stands still. It's a very strange atmosphere, and especially if you go to the solstice at Stonehenge. And so that ties in with a Buddhist thing, which is what they call the bardo, which is the waiting period between reincarnation. So that's Cain's sort of take on it, but it's this sense of limbo.
As Cain often says, embrace uncertainty, right?
Embrace uncertainty, that which is his approach to crime solving. Yeah. Unlike Shanti, who's always wanting to push on, and she makes very quick assumptions about who did it, and invariably gets it wrong. But they're a team. They're symbiotic. They're symbiotic.
I mean, they're almost like two halves of the brain. It's almost like a sort of left brain and right brain thing.
Exactly right. That's exactly what they are. Yeah.
And it works very well. But it's interesting.
Yeah. And occasionally they have a physical relationship, which is a bit of a strange metaphor to follow through.
Well, okay. Yes. I mean, that sort of appears at the very end of the second novel. So I was wondering if you were going to draw a veil over that, or leave that in suspense. But you've told everybody. It is consummated. The relationship is consummated.
I think you have certain set rules for the way in which your books work, and there's always this thing that Cain is a very reluctant detective. He does not want to be there, but he gets dragged into it each time. Then he's desperately in love with Shanti, and Shanti just simply does not want to know. She does not want to mix work with romance. And whenever Cain reminds her of the time they shared a tent at Glastonbury, or the night on the bay by his cabin or so on, she says there was no bay, there was no festival, and then inevitably at the end, romance blossoms.
Yes.
I'm an old softie. Yeah.
It's beautiful. So I just want to quickly mention to everybody who's out there that you can ask, if you want to ask Laurence a question, please do. We've got a box at the bottom. It says ask a question. So if you type something in there, I can read the question, and then I can put that question to Laurence. So we do have a question, which is about mugs. Tell us about Vince. Vince has an interesting collection of mugs. Maybe you can enlighten us in more ways than one.
This idea came from a Buddhist friend, actually, who had this incredible collection of mugs, each one with a Buddhist slogan on them. And again, it's sort of a Buddhist humor. So it says, there's no place like Om, or, whatever it happens to be. And so Cain has this, because he doesn't like using, plastic cups or disposable items. He carries his own mugs with him, and they always have a sort of pertinent slogan on them. But I'm beginning to wish that I hadn't done that, because I'm running out of good slogans. But
I'm amazed at how he seems to be able to bring them out at the most opportune moments, even when they're sort of in the middle of a Glastonbury festival, for example. He sort of carries a sort of fresh supply of mugs around with him wherever he goes. I've got a
very strict editor, and if I get it wrong, I get a slap on the wrist, and she tells me too many mugs.
Yes, you have to mug up on your mugs, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. But if you Google Buddhist humor or Buddhist jokes, it's a whole sort of canon. It's good fun.
Okay, so another question: Have you been on a Buddhist retreat yourself? Because Vince does, or has. Sorry,
I have. Yes, I have. I've been on a couple, and they. They vary a lot, and I haven't been on one since I started doing these books, and I'm really interested in the idea of writing a murder mystery that takes place at a Buddhist retreat. So I think I would quite like to go to one and take a notebook. But yeah, I have been to several, and some of them are. I think it depends where you are in your life. I went to one when I was younger, and the monk who was running it, who was about my age, and he was quite sort of macho and good-looking guy, and he was surrounded by mainly women on the retreat, and he really resented having me there. So he kept giving me jobs, like, for example, I always ended up cleaning the toilets and so on, which he said was, good for my immortal soul. But
right.
but no, on a more serious note, I'm a member of a local Buddhist group in Bridport, and originally in Axminster. Lovely, lovely bunch of people. And under normal circumstances, we meet on every other Saturday, and it used to be every Wednesday. And I did at one time a foundation course in Buddhist studies. So it's something that really interests me. It's sort of I will get told off for saying this, but I think of Buddhism as a sort of a toolkit, and you can take out the tools that are relevant to you at particular times in your life. But it is important to me, and you always sound like a bit of an idiot when you start talking about these things. But meditation for me is a daily ritual because I have a brain like Piccadilly Circus. And I need to find a way of steadying myself and offsetting that a little bit. So for me,
that's just a great image. A mind like Piccadilly Circus. I think we can all take.
Yeah, I mean, for me, to in the summer, for example, to sit outside where I live and spend half an hour just sitting there in silence before I start work, just sort of makes my day, really. And it's a really, really helpful antidote to all of the intensely cerebral stuff that you're doing for the rest of the day.
So I've got a question here. Who would you like to play Shanti and Cain in a TV series? Yeah, great question.
I went to meet the film company, and they asked me the very same question. And of course, the actors that I came up with, they'd never heard of, because most of them were now my age. They were in their 60s, so it didn't work out quite so well. But I mean, we're not at that stage. I honestly don't know. But they'd have to be. They'd have to be. I mean, I can see them very clearly in my head. They're very human. They're not sort of fashion models. But there's something attractive about both of them in different ways. I honestly don't know. But my daughter, Maddie, is an actor and has got her first book deal this week. Yay!
Oh, hooray! Congratulations.
And to be honest, when I was writing Shanti, I often thought about Maddie. She's got that sort of wit and that sort of character, and so Maddie was in my mind a lot. So maybe Maddie could play Shanti Joyce.
Right. Okay. I mean, not an easy character to play, I would imagine, because you've got to get that combination of dry humor, and she's pretty feisty.
Yeah. And she would also have to be, these days, you would have to have someone who was the correct ethnic mix. And although my kids we are a peculiar old ethnic mix, it's not quite the right one. So I honestly don't know. But we shall see. Look, this may not happen.
It's early days, but yes, let's fingers crossed that we'll see the Mindful Detective on our TV screens.
It would be fun. It would be nice. It would be a fun diversion. It would be great to see this area on TV. So we shall see.
Yeah. So another question is about influences. I mean, talking about local TV, series. There was the Broadchurch that was filmed very close to where I am now. I mean, do you have it? I mean, in terms of crime, I mean, obviously, we've talked about your art background and what have you. Are there any influences, or have there been any that you are aware of? I know, because it's a question that I get asked, and sometimes it's not an easy one to answer, because sometimes influences, it's not obvious who your influences are, but maybe for you it is. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're all influenced, aren't we? I mean, there is no such thing as something that is completely original, and you know, everything that you produce is an amalgamation of things that you've read and seen and experienced in your own life. I have all sorts of very diverse influences. I think when I'm working on this series. I mean, for example, you know, I'm a lover of Thomas Hardy, and in fact, the reason I'm living in this part of the world is my mum was a Thomas Hardy specialist. She was a Thomas Hardy teacher, and she always dreamed of moving to Hardy country when she retired. So she moved down here many years ago, and then 35 years ago we followed her to this part of the world. So Hardy's a big influence for me. And now I'm writing Stonehenge, of course, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, the wonderful scene set at the stones, which I'm going to sort of riff off in this. You know, there's going to be a scene where Shanti sleeps on the stone. She's exhausted, so Hardy definitely. But then things as diverse as I mean, Tintin, for God's sake. When I was a kid, I liked Tintin very much. Not very politically correct these days. Very white, very male. But there was something about the surreal humour that really appealed to me when I was a kid. And there's a little bit of that in these books, I think. So all kinds of stuff.
And you know, Tintin is a kind of detective in his own right, often in a lot of the stories. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, yeah. So all kinds of stuff. I'm sure there are many other books that have slipped my mind, but yeah, there are a lot of influences there. Yeah. So here's a question from Victoria. What book are you reading at the moment?
What book am I reading at the moment? Well, I am actually reading my daughter Maddie's book, which is not yet published, and she just got this publishing deal, and I'm reading it through for her, and it's really good. It's really interesting. It's non-fiction, but it's funny, it's witty, and it's about it's a really valuable book for young women. Not only women, but mainly for young women, about coercive control and controlling relationships and psychopathy and narcissists and so on and so forth. And she's got the backing of Women's Aid, and it's really good and it's really funny. And it's going to be called How to Leave Your Psychopath. And that's coming out next year. It's going to be a cracker. It's going to be a cracker. That's what I'm reading now. But yeah, I mean, I read all sorts of stuff. Trying to remember what the book before I read was. I read Wilding, you know, Isabel Tree, because I'm very interested in rewilding and all of that sort of thing. I read all sorts of stuff. Yeah, I love to read. Yeah.
So we've got time for one last one. It's about mindfulness, and so. Is mindfulness just like watered down Buddhism? I don't know if you're going to have to answer this in about 2 minutes.
Is mindfulness watered down Buddhism? No, but I think that mindfulness is one aspect of Buddhism, and it's a really valuable. It's one of those tools in the toolkit, and it's a really valuable tool. I think we can all benefit from that, and it's just the very simple thing of being present, being in the moment. Of you know, we run through life, and it's like, you know, we haven't caught ourselves up, and so just to stop and be aware of what you're doing is something that's very important to Cain. You know, when Cain eats, he eats very slowly and he savors each mouthful, and it drives Shanti absolutely nuts.
Well, yeah, she's sort of anything but mindful, I suppose. You know, she's whatever the opposite of mindfulness is. I suppose, you know, that's where she's.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the final thing to say about that, I think, is you know, it's a thing actually that changes through the years as you get older. Now in my 60s, for me, there's nothing that I enjoy more than to spend a day outside, working outside, just doing some very simple activity. I really enjoy it. And also, you know, with writing, it is a mindful activity. You can't rush it. You just have to be there. It takes a tremendously long time. For me, every sentence has to be polished. I rewrite every sentence. You know about all this, Jason. You know, and it is a mindful activity. Yeah.
Well, that's great. I think we're going to have to go. We're running out of time, so we're going to have to wrap this up now. But
I wish I could come and hug all my friends out there, because I know, you know, a lot of people I haven't seen in the flesh for a long time are listening in, and I love you.
Well, look, I just want to say thank you so much, Laurence, for sharing, your time with us and your experiences and telling us about this wonderful series. Just a reminder to everybody that you can buy, there is a link to the online local independent bookshop that's linked to the Shute Festival, so you can buy his books there. Please do that. And I've just got a few seconds to remind people that there is the next event for the Shute Festival will be on the 25th of March, when you'll be taken to the Quantox in Somerset. And Martin Hess will be talking to Sam Knights about his historical fiction novel based on the true and bizarre story of the ancient group of broom squires. And it involves murder, again, and a public hanging, and it's all set against a backdrop of a rural valley in the Southwest. And just also to point out that I will be back at the Shute Festival on the 24th of June with my wife Salud, who's a flamenco dancer, and we'll be talking about I'll be talking about flamenco, and she'll be actually dancing it, hopefully over Zoom. So that will be an interesting experience. But just to say thank you once again to Laurence, and thank you to Sam and everyone involved in the festival. It's wonderful that it's still going on, and we just got to keep these things happening. So that's great. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joseph, and thanks to everyone for listening in. Really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you on the other side.
Absolutely. Bye-bye to everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.